And a very pleasant good evening to you on this Tuesday. It is time for Southern Utah Forum on Talk Radio 590 KSUB. Chris, again, has the evening off. I'm Tim. And you might think we're beating a dead horse. And maybe to a certain degree we might be. I don't think so, though. The State Republican Convention, the organizing convention, this was not a nominating convention, was held last Saturday in Salt Lake. I had the pleasure to attend as a state delegate from my precinct. As did Casey Anderson, who is with us. Casey, of course, a former state senator. And Blake Cozzens was also a delegate. He's also the county chairman of the Republican Party, so we're in good hands. I want to talk a little bit about that. And I want to actually issue, I'm not really supposed to do this, because I think we are going to still talk about a little bit about caucus convention system versus a primary. If Josh Huntsman is listening, and I'm not trying to get into a fight, but I'd really love you to call Josh or even run into the radio station, because I'd love to have this dialogue on the air. And we're not picking on you, but we just want to have an interesting dialogue. So Josh, if you happen to be tuned in, 586-5900. And for that matter, anyone who wants to call is welcome to the show tonight on the phone at 586-5900 if you'd like to. All right, guys, first of all, whose idea was it to leave at 4 in the morning? I actually have to have that discussion with someone. No one's taking credit for that. I think I'll blame you, Blake, because you had to be up for the meeting earlier in the day. Actually, let's run through the day, because it wasn't for you. It was not just the convention. You had a business to do earlier in the day, didn't you?
Yeah. So I serve on the State Central Committee. That the chairman and vice chair of each county, as well as certain at-large positions for the State Central Committee throughout the county, serve on that. And there was an emergency meeting called to vote on raising the threshold. Now, we had already voted on that 2 times previously on whether they wanted to raise it or not, and they did not receive the votes they needed. And they felt that they would be able to receive those votes at the convention by calling an emergency meeting prior. And they actually received the least amount of votes they have ever received. They didn't even receive a simple majority this time.
Now, you term it as an emergency meeting, but in what cursory study I've done on it, they didn't do anything improper. They had enough people on the committee, because can a state central committee meeting be called if enough members of the committee ask for that to happen? And that happened, did it not?
Right. So normally there's 4 meetings a year, but the way they did this one, and it was within the rules, but they had 45 members call a meeting with 1 week's notice, which is termed as a special emergency meeting. So.
It's okay, but still, that is something that can be done.
Correct.
They didn't break any rules to do that.
Correct.
But it did come up pretty quickly.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, just 1 week's notice that people were given.
So what do you suppose was the hope of those that called that meeting to have happen? I know you kind of briefly explained it, but let's go a little let's drill down on that some.
So the threshold is currently at 60% to avoid a primary.
So let's explain that more in detail. At a nominating convention in the Republican Party, is it the same for the Democrats? I don't know if they run this. Okay. Casey says yes. This is radio. Shaking your head does not necessarily work all the time. So at a nominating convention for either the Democrats or the Republicans, if the convention supports a candidate with 60% or more of the vote, then that candidate becomes the nominee for the party. Do I have that correct?
Correct, yeah.
And some of the folks that called the emergency meeting of the State Central Committee wanted to raise that threshold from what to what?
They wanted to raise it from 60% to 2/3.
Which would be 66 point whatever, 0.10 whatever. All right, so they wanted to raise that up. This is a vote that had happened before, had it not?
Correct. It had happened in our March meeting. That one was non-binding, but it was basically a straw poll, and it did not receive the votes needed, which is a 2/3 threshold in order to pass. And then they also voted on it in the April meeting, and it received 5 votes shy of that 2/3 threshold.
But it did pass.
Correct.
So how did that change the complexion of then what would happen later in the organizing convention that we all were a part of?
So what they were hoping for is if they did receive that 2/3 vote of the State Central Committee, then they would only need a simple majority at the convention. But they didn't receive that 2/3 threshold, so they would have needed 2/3 of the delegates to vote for that. And they actually, in the convention, they didn't even receive a simple majority of the votes.
So what they were hoping then coming out of the Central Committee was that they would have to lessen what the threshold of what they would need to pass this change in was it constitutional or bylaw change? I can't remember.
Constitution.
Okay, so to change the constitution of the Republican Party, they were hoping that they would have changed it so that only a simple majority of the delegates at the convention, and I'm assuming that their thinking was that would be an easier goal to take or to achieve.
Exactly.
Okay. Very, very heated discussion on that on the convention floor about changing the threshold of nominees raising from 60 to 66%. I know we don't, and again, I wish we get some dialogue from some folks that would like to see it raised. 586-5900. As far as you can determine, gentlemen, what is the thinking of those that want to see that threshold raised up?
Well, essentially, there's, at least from my point of view, there seems to be two groups that are primarily advocating for the threshold increase. And it's important to look at the motivation. That the goal of increasing the thresholds would result in approximately 30% more primaries. So what does that do? Number one, it really benefits one particular group that I really had a chance to get to know up at the Capitol, and that is political consultants, members of the media, lobbyists. And what it does is when you have primaries, there's an immense amount of money that ends up being spent. And where that goes is to political consultants who then market campaign materials, whether it be TV, radio, or direct mailers, primarily direct mailers. So you have a group of people who really seek to profit off of having more primaries. Both the political consultants and members of the media who may be struggling with advertising dollars. I think more so the political consultants who actually make a commission off of the amount of direct mailers that they do in any particular race. The other group that seeks to benefit is the lobbyists. And the fact is the current caucus convention system limits the amount of influence that money can get you. Whereas in a primary, it's entirely money.
Let me ask you a question on that, though. Because I've been a state delegate and went to the nominating convention a year ago, they can still try to influence the delegates, can they not? I don't know. No one ever offered me any money, but I got a lunch or two from some of the candidates.
The reason that money is less influential in the convention system is because you have more time to speak to a smaller group of people who, of course, are elected by a majority of their neighbors. So as a candidate, it's more effective for me to go speak to every delegate individually, every local neighborhood representative. I can go speak to them individually about the issues that they care about and that their precinct cares about. In a primary, you essentially have 2 months to speak to, if you're in a congressional race, you're looking at 700,000 people for a congressional district. It is impractical to speak to each one individually about the issues. So what happens is they have to get their message out through 30-second TV and radio ads, and therefore there's much more negative campaigning because there's not that close personal interaction with the voters, and money is so much more important. It would be impractical to talk to voters on a one-on-one basis. Therefore, you have to go to where the money is, where somebody's willing to write you a $2,000 check, and that's up in Salt Lake City or in Washington, D.C.
So it's your belief, and by the way, in full disclosure, I also voted against raising the threshold as a state delegate, and if that's going to cost me next time we have a precinct meeting, I guess. But the reason I'm against it now, of all the people in the room, who do you think would be most interested in having more primaries?
I think people who would be most...
in this room.
I have no clue. Probably you. You're the radio host.
Yeah, exactly why. Because why?
Because people who are running campaigns... politicians for public office need to pay you for advertising to get their message out.
Exactly, and if I get in trouble, if I'm in the boss's office tomorrow, you'll know why. But I also have come to in the studying I've done, come to be in agreement that if we throw things into a primary, then that's when money takes over. That's when money becomes influence, and we've been harped on by so many. including some that might have more Democratic or liberal-leaning atmospheres. Like, money in politics is bad. And I can't understand why we've done something that I believe will at least have limits on the influence of money in political races, and we're being painted as a bunch of people that have no forward-looking thinking.
Well, I think that's a typical logical fallacy that most college students learn about, and that is when you don't have a logical argument, you typically tend to attack the person's character. And the fact is the people who have gone on the offensive, who have attacked the caucuses, we're simply defending the current system, and they're the ones. You said beating a dead horse. They're beating a dead horse by continuously bringing up the same issue time and time again, even though it's been proven that people who are educated on the issues do not want to see a change.
It's funny because about a week before the convention, we all got emails from Thomas Wright, who was then the chairman of the Republican Party statewide, and they had a poll. One thing that all of us missed, because we had a pretty good discussion on this on the 4 o'clock in the morning trip on the way up. But we talked about how they had failed to look at one of their own results that showed that 66% and this was a poll among caucus delegates, 66% said, no, it's okay where it was. They kept haranguing on the whole fact that 77% thought if it was raised to be 2/3 would be okay. We didn't talk about this. They certainly didn't talk about it at the convention, but I went back and looked at that again. There was another question in there, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but it basically says, if it's explained to people, once the caucus and convention system is explained to people, including the fact that a nominee is made from a party after they get 6% of the vote, 76% of the caucus people that were polled in that poll agreed with that. That's 1% or an insignificant, a statistically non-meaning difference between that and the 77% that they kept throwing at. And I just saw that last night or the other night as I was looking at it. I go, we didn't even talk about that. I mean, that's an issue that washes out.
Well, I think we've seen time and time again that these organizations that do polling are beholden to the organizations that are paying them for the polls. And, they'll conduct a poll and they'll report certain information and leave out other information. And I think this was a perfect example of where those who are going on the offensive to eliminate our caucus system simply did not have a good feel for where state delegates stood on the issue, where caucus attendees stand on the issue. Roughly 125,000 people attended last year's caucuses, and 66% of them want to keep the current system because they know the rules, they understand
Actually,
it. And
76 if you drill down even further.
Yeah, 76 want to keep the current system, 66% want to keep the threshold where it's at if you really want to get down to the details. And I think that that's because they understand the system and they know the benefits that it has for them as voters.
All right, 586-5900. We'd love to hear from you on this or anything else that happened. There were some other things that happened at the convention, including nominating and selecting a new state party chair. We can talk about that, too, and we'll do all that when we come back on Southern Utah Forum. But you're welcome to join in. We hope you will. 586-5900. Back with more right after this.
Find out why you're going broke. Bob Brinker's Money Talk. Sunday 2 to 5 here on Talk Radio 590 KSUB.
Southern Utah Forum on a Tuesday afternoon. Chris has the night off. I'm Tim. Blake Cozzens and Casey Anderson, state delegates to the recently concluded organizing committee or convention of the State Republican Party. I was also a delegate, so we're talking about that. We're gonna switch gears for a minute, though, guys. I want to play Let's Pretend. Okay, because James Evans, and I'm going to lead us back into the conversation we're having. James Evans was nominated and selected, chosen as the new state chairman for the Republican Party. Now, you know who he is. Let me ask you questions. I want to play, and this is going to be a little red meat-ish, if you know what I mean. This is going to be kind of tossing out some talking points that seem easy to go with. But let's say, for example, it's now July or June when the Democrats are having the convention, and James Evans happens to be more different in his positions. He's more liberal. He is a Democrat. And let's say the Democrats nominate him as the leader of the Democratic Party. What do you suppose the lead would be from the media after that convention? Anyone want to take a shot at that?
So the question is, if the current Republican Party state chairman leaves the party and joins the Democratic Party?
Let's say he had been Democrat. He was Democrat, had those leanings, but now all of a sudden he as a Democrat in those leanings, he's now the new state chairman of the Democratic Party. What would be the lead of the story? What do you think? I mean, it can relate to our current president for that matter.
That's a tough question. I've never worked in media, so I don't understand the thought process between going.
Think of our current president for that matter.
But as far as the headline, it'd probably say something, like elects first African American chair of the party.
I would agree with that 100%. The Democrats elect the first African American chairman of the party. What do you suppose? And I saved this story because it frosted me so much. What do you suppose the lead was for when they were reporting James Evans as the state Republican chairman?
Well, I believe they accused him of being a crook because he runs payday loans for a living. And so
Blake gets it right. That's exactly the story starts off. A payday loan company owner is the new Utah GOP chairman. In other words, he's a loan shark is basically what they're saying. Now, I don't want to harangue on this too much, but I want to go back. Because I am in the media, and I have seen this too many times, where they make assumptions and figure that that's fact. They didn't say anything about the Republican Party nominating an African American as its chairman. It was all the big news when the president was elected. It would be all the news if this again had been the Democratic, but instead they chose to go with the fact that he runs a loan company, a payday loan company, which has its, I guess, own implications. So the media tries to direct us in certain thought processes. Now, going back to the convention caucus system versus primary, I believe the media has already made up its mind.
It has, and again, I think it goes back to the unfortunate fact that people who lack a logical justification or argument often appeal to emotion. And the fact is yes, there's some people out there who have fallen into the unfortunate situation where they have to accept high interest loans, and the media is playing on that anger and frustration. And I know for a fact I didn't hear any discussion amongst state delegates of the Republican Party regarding race or ethnicity. It was entirely about the issues. Where does this individual stand on the issues? What's his experience when it comes to being able to fulfill the responsibilities of the position that he's being elected for? And I think that when it comes to delegates, they have a better opportunity to vet candidates based on the issues rather than based on these very shallow attacks that the media often portrays us as.
All right, so going back to the emotional part of it, because if it hasn't already started, and I expect it probably already has, but the Count My Vote people, they're not done yet, are they? By any stretch of the imagination?
No, they have to have their ballot initiative prepared and done by June 3rd, and then they will have 317 days from that date to get all the signatures which are required. And that's a pretty tough process to accomplish. They have to get it, I believe it's just over 100,000 signatures, and not all the signatures can be from one county. They have to be from 26 of the 29 counties, and there's a certain percentage of those signatures that have to be from each of those counties.
So they have that process to do. Just the name of the organization, what do you think emotions that brings out to the general public?
Well, I think it's very misleading. I think for those of us who participate in the caucus system and who overwhelmingly want to be able to keep our vote, for somebody to name their organization the Count My Vote Coalition when what they're trying to do is take away my vote and to dilute my vote and the opportunity that I have to speak to candidates, that's very misleading, in my opinion. The fact that in Utah, we have a system to where you can choose your level of activity, your level of involvement that you want to participate in. And other states, they don't give their voters the opportunity to choose their level of activity. And they want us to go more towards a California model or another state to where you can't choose. And that's very unfortunate.
Let's talk about that, because a lot of criticism from the Count My Vote folks is that we're just this old kind of quaint, archaic system, and we should be more like other states. Like what? What do they want us to be like?
Well, their ballot initiative is modeled after Connecticut's election process. And so what they want to accomplish is allow, by virtue of a ballot, after the ballot initiative passes, what they want to happen is if you get 20,000 or so petition signatures, you can be placed on the ballot as a Republican. Now, it's mostly fair to say that currently, if you're the Republican nominee, you're going to be the office holder. So what you'd have then is you'd probably have 7, 9, 13 Republicans on the ballot at the same time vying for the office, and you wouldn't have a majority winner. And that's pretty important to have a majority winner, and that's what they're vying for, is to eliminate the majority winner. And currently they've criticized, right now we do multiple round balloting in our convention caucus system. They've criticized that, and they don't like multiple round balloting. They would prefer that somebody be able to win without a majority of the vote.
So, in other words, whoever has the most vote, even if it's not a 50% majority or anything like that?
Exactly.
All right, that seems kind of unusual. 586-5900 is our telephone number here if you'd like to be a part of the show. Interestingly, one of the biggest critics of changing the convention caucus system is who in the state of Utah?
Well, there's a few on the Count My Vote coalition. Former Governor Mike Leavitt, LeVar Webb, and there's a few others, but those are the primary. Kirk Jowers with the Hinckley Institute of Politics. But those are the primary leaders in the Count My Vote coalition.
But I found interesting that the Democratic Party chairman pretty much said, don't change this.
One thing that's very interesting is typically in politics, at least those who have a lot of experience in politics, they try to go the path of least resistance. You always want to go the easiest path to accomplish the greatest goal. And what the Count My Vote coalition has chosen to do is go by far the most difficult path, which will cost millions of dollars and an immense amount of time and resources. And the reason that they're doing that is because not only does the Republican Party support the current system as it is, but the Democratic Party supports the current system as it is, and the state legislature supports the current system as it is. They couldn't even find a sponsor for the bill. And that's why they're having to go the route of paying people to collect signatures. And they're going to use platitudes like, your vote doesn't count. And it's very, we need to have a more democratic process and we need to increase participation. But it's very easy to break down every single one of the arguments that they're going to be using.
All right. And I want to talk about some of those emotional responses like your vote doesn't count and how we can help people understand that their vote can actually have a much more significant impact under the current system, because I believe it actually does. Back with the rest of Southern Utah Forum after this on a Tuesday afternoon from Talk Radio 590 KSUB.
Talk Radio 590 KSUB. Hey, we know we'll never please everybody, but it doesn't keep us from trying.
Southern Utah Forum on a Tuesday afternoon, about 12 before 6 o'clock. Blake Cozzens, Casey Anderson with us. You're welcome to join us on the phone, 586-5900. And I wish someone would call in and ask this question, but how do you respond to those that might be saying, well, you guys that go to the caucuses and the conventions and your delegates and all that, you just don't want me to vote. You're just trying to keep me from voting. How do you answer that?
I would answer it by saying, why won't you come to your caucus meeting and run as a delegate? Or if you're not wanting to run as a delegate, and because a delegate does require a lot of time, you have to spend several hours and hours vetting candidates. So if you don't have that kind of time, then participate in helping one of your trusted neighbors or friends get elected as a delegate, and that is a significant voice that you have in determining an election right there.
Or run yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Run yourself. I mean, you think that now a lot of people think that that's a hard thing to do. It's not. It's really not.
So the process, the way that it works, is the state delegates who are elected by the majority of their neighbors attend the state convention or a county convention, depending on the office that's being sought, and those delegates vote on the candidates. And if it's if it's not a close race, if you don't have two competitive candidates, then then the nominee is selected. But if it's a close race, and that is within 20%, I mean, that's a huge margin. If it's a close race, then it still goes to a primary. So the caucus really just acts as a filter to make sure that we have competitive candidates going to a primary, rather than, the Count My Vote coalition thinks that you should be able to have 10 different candidates on the primary ballot, and a candidate can win with 20%. That's a very undemocratic process, and that's one reason why I think the current caucus system is really misunderstood by some.
And I want to point out, if there's a poster boy for someone who wasn't involved and who now is a little bit more involved, and probably not like I should be, I'm that person. You said something on the write-up, Casey, that I'd like you to discuss. I don't know if I agree with you completely, but I do accept your premise. And you said that a person has 3 duties. Do you remember this conversation?
I do.
And repeat those if you would, if you don't mind.
Well, I think it was 4,
Okay.
but the fourth one was more out of requirement, which was work. I believe that every individual really has 4 responsibilities in life, and obviously in no particular order. Obviously, family, church, and then being involved in your government. I believe that is a civic duty. And then the 4th one, work. I believe every individual has a responsibility to work and to provide for themselves and their family and other individuals in the community that might need help.
And I may have misinterpreted, but it seemed like you didn't have any kind of prioritization on that. And that's where I said, I don't know if I completely agree with it, because I think maybe family would be prioritized above, participation in government. But I do understand your point.
I think the reason it's important, at least from my perspective, to not prioritize is, in my opinion, if you lose one, then you lose all of them. So I believe that the time commitment, the level of dedication to all 3 of those, family, church, and good government, I believe that you have to dedicate the same amount of time to all 3 as much as possible.
Okay, now, and if that was we got calls coming in. If that was the case, then I would think we'd be in a better situation. But again, being the poster boy for someone who's repented, actually, I was the guy that seriously literally sat on the couch and said, "Oh, it's election day, I better go vote." That was my entire effort, and I sadly admit to that. And sadly, and maybe judgmentally, I'm saying I'm not alone, or I wasn't alone. Hi, caller. Good afternoon. You're on Southern Utah Forum.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, I've served as a state delegate twice, and from the caucus level, our neighborhood caucuses, they're some of the most informed and well-read voters that we have. And I'd like to keep a plug for the caucus system, because I think those people that are elected to go to the state convention know much more of the issues and are better prepared to vote on candidates than the local populace. And that's why I think we ought to stick with that caucus system.
Okay, very good. How many years have you gone up?
2 years.
Okay.
By
the way, let me ask you a question. How much did you get paid to go to the convention?
I think it was a big 0.
Okay.
Well, not only do we not get paid, but it's a great personal sacrifice that delegates choose to participate. To drive up to Salt Lake City, it can cost $100. For those of us who live far distance away, oftentimes we have to get a hotel room or something. That can cost another $100. It's a great personal sacrifice that we invest time in our process.
Or we can do my favorite thing to do on Saturday morning, and that's get up at 3. That's all right. I couldn't believe that. When I got the email, I said, "Oh, we're leaving at 4 this afternoon." Okay, that's fine. Hey, caller, thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
Appreciate you calling in here to be on this. And, in my situation, I don't know if I'll ever go to another state convention. I would not mind. I'd like to. Who knows? At the next precinct meeting, they may say, "Thanks, Tim. It's been nice. Sit down." And that's okay. That's okay, because I think you're right. I think but the thing is, I will be to my next precinct meeting. I kind of have to be, actually, because I want that level of. I've been in Utah in and out for the last 30 years. Do you know when I went to my first caucus meeting? 3 years ago? It was my very first caucus meeting. No, I'm sorry, 5 years ago.
I think in the past, when caucus attendance was lower, the special interest groups really were able to easily infiltrate the system and participate. Since 2010, we've had record turnout both in 2010 and 2012, and now that more people are getting involved, more grassroots working families that in the past didn't have a chance to get involved, I think you're starting to see the special interest groups that used to have a chokehold on the system, they are now less influential with the system because more people are getting involved. So I'm always a huge advocate for getting as many people to attend as possible.
And I think we should work on it. In fact, I think that is our key, and I, as a precinct chair, which I am, and I know, Blake, you're concerned about this, we need to make sure that we are reaching out to our neighborhoods and get them to these precinct caucus meetings, do we not?
Yes, exactly. One of the things that they've been saying up north, like Doug Wright, for example, has been saying that more primaries increases participation. I completely disagree with that. I think that this is the participation, going to your caucus meeting with your neighbors in a local neighborhood meeting and electing your delegates that you trust to delegate that responsibility to them to represent your voice. And because, as mentioned before, in a primary, you can't reach all those thousands and thousands of voters. But with the delegates, you can have one-on-one conversations, town hall meetings, and really communicate in a personal level with those candidates and thoroughly vet them on the issues.
And the other side of that, too, Blake, is everyone in my community or my neighborhood, they know where I live. My phone number's in the book. If they've got things that they want me to put into my thought process as I'm going up and considering candidates at a state convention, they can just come knock on my door.
Exactly. So delegates should be hearing from their neighbors on their thoughts. Even if you're not a delegate, you have a delegate who you know that's maybe 3 doors down from you, who you can easily have access to and ask them what's been going on in the races. Will you make sure and make this a key vocal point in vetting the candidates for me? I would really appreciate that. And they know that if they don't listen to you, then they're likely to not get elected the next time they run for delegate.
One thing that's difficult to understand is we currently have primaries. Orrin Hatch was in a primary, and many candidates are in primaries.
And quickly, I want to, and I want you to continue, but everyone keeps going back like, we did some evil thing by Mike Lee becoming a senator from the state of Utah. He came out of a primary, did he not?
Yeah, Mike Lee, who actually lost with the delegates and generally speaking is known as a more conservative candidate than his opponent, he lost at state convention quite significantly and ended up winning in a primary. John Dougal for state auditor went at state convention and lost to the 18-year, somebody who was conceived to be more moderate, and John Dougal won in the primary. So this whole argument that the caucus convention system favors the more radical wing of the party, I think is just is media talking point that is completely unfounded, and it's unfortunate.
Wasn't it Bridgewater that came out of that convention against Lee and was actually endorsed by Bennett? Caller, we got about a minute. Very quickly, you're on Southern Utah Forum.
Well, I think when you introduce the primaries, what you're really doing is you're increasing the weight of emotional voters, because that's what you get when you get out to the mass audiences. Is they appeal on the emotional level, and personally, I like intellectual voters, which you find at the caucus, and people who are vested because they've made investments, they've done their homework, and they make the effort. So that's what I like.
Okay.
Thanks.
I think that's a great point. Not only emotional voters, but also voters who really don't spend the time researching the candidates and might end up, they just receive a ballot in the mail, they check a box. I've even seen cases where somebody will have everybody else check the box for them. If you want to talk about lack of participation, I think in a primary you get far less meaningful participation.
All right, we're literally down to the last minute, caller. We got a very quick question for us.
I just wanted to introduce and see what your thoughts are on expanding access to the local caucuses using technology or, maybe balloting that's delivered to the precinct chair. What do you think about that?
I'm open to those ideas. My main concern with those is just making sure that we always prevent voter fraud. So as long as we have that in mind when we're looking at those ideas, I'm very open to making sure that we incorporate those.
That's one thing I also, thank you, caller, we have to run. That's one thing I did. I don't think any of us have said that we have the perfect system that can't be looked at. But we think that by and large, the system is working. And if we can make improvements to it, I'm sure that we'll support those, will we not? Again, shaking the heads doesn't work. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll try and get a podcast of this up. I know Blake, I'm going to get it to Blake sometime, and he'll put it up on the website.
Also, we produced a video for the Iron County Republican Party to inform people on the caucus system. If you go to ironcountygop.org, you can see that and a lot more information on what the caucus system is.
Okay, that's ironcountygop.org, KSUB, Cedar City, 6 o'clock.